David Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a great pleasure to be able to lead this debate on government support for freedom of religion or belief in Nigeria, and I hope that we have some good debate here this evening. Recent events have thrown the spotlight on Nigeria in general and on freedom of religion or belief in particular, and I hope that this debate can strengthen that spotlight. One fact should make the scale of the challenge clear. More Christians are killed each year in Nigeria for being Christians than in all other countries combined. That's one reason why Nigeria is one of 10 focus countries in the first Foreign Office Freedom of Religion or Belief strategy, which I was pleased to launch last year. And to declare that interest, I'm UK Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief, or FoRB, as I will say from now on in the debate. I'm committed to that strategy and to seeing Nigeria's FoRB improve in the coming years. 15 years ago, you see, Madam Deputy Speaker, I spent some time in Nigeria, and it was clear even then that persecution was a serious problem. I remember sitting in a hotel room in Abuja, a very nice hotel actually as it was, and hearing directly from a man whose wife had been brutally murdered, in fact, it's sad to say, burned to death by a mob in northern Nigeria, purely because in that context she was a Christian. Let me reiterate, that was 15 years ago. And the FoRB crisis in Nigeria is persistent and entrenched, with violence in the north and the Middle Belt, a way of life for Christians, Hausa Muslims, those of traditional belief systems, humanists and others. Meanwhile, some federal state legal systems have been manipulated by some politicians and other public officials in order to impose so-called blasphemy and apostasy offences, despite Section 38 of the Nigerian Federal Constitution guaranteeing freedom of religion and freedom of conscience. So Nigeria's FoRB crisis is partly about violence, but it's also about legal suppression of freedoms at the state level, and it is a multi-faith crisis. While the majority of those affected are Christian, all FoRB advocates know that persecution of one group invites persecution of others. Moderate Muslims, atheists, humanists, practitioners of traditional religions are all suffering in Nigeria for what they believe. I'd be happy to give way.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for North Northumberland for bringing this forward? I have to say as well, I think government have made an excellent choice of the Honourable Gentleman as their envoy as well. And I also say as well, God has chosen him to be the position that he has, and that is more important than anything. But is the Honourable Member aware of the findings of the Global Christian Relief Red List 2026, which identifies the top 5 persecutors of Christians worldwide? One of them is Nigeria. And does the Honourable Member agree that the UK government, I say this to the Minister because he's an honourable man and I know he answers our issues, government must use its diplomatic engagement, development assistance and security cooperation to press for improved civilian protection, accountability for perpetrators and the defence of freedom of religion or belief for all Nigerians, whatever that faith may be?
David Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Honourable Member for Strangford. I know that this is a matter, an issue that he is really concerned about and spend a lot of his time in this place on. And I am aware of that list, and I'll be pleased tomorrow to be speaking at the Open Doors World Watch List launch. And they also, I understand, Nigeria is high on that list. So, what does this have to do with us in this place, Madam Deputy Speaker? Well, firstly, the government is committed to a values-based foreign policy. Our consciences won't let us ignore the suffering of anyone denied dignity, agency and freedom. When people ask, why do you care about something like this in Nigeria, our response is, how could we not? So I'm pleased to support a government that has moved to address suffering as far and as wide as possible. But secondly, Nigeria's business is becoming everyone's business. The old adage is that when Nigeria sneezes, Africa catches a cold. Nigeria is booming with a population of 240 million people, which will keep growing for years to come. In the UK, we have 270,000 Nigerian-born residents who make a dynamic contribution to our economy, society and country. So a flourishing Nigeria, built on the common good, pluralism and universal freedoms, will be a blessing to the world, to Africa and to the UK. I would be happy to give way.
I'm very grateful, and I also think it's a very good thing that he's taken the role that he has. He mentions the impact of this issue around the world. Does he recognise that what is going on in Nigeria, and he's absolutely right that it's in a sense the worst example of it, but it represents a pattern of Islamist persecution of Christians. It's not just a series of individual atrocities that are committed. There is a global pattern Islamist persecution of Christians. And I think it's right that we in this House acknowledge that. Does he agree?
David Smith.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his contribution, and I'd certainly say that there are patterns around the world that we have to look at and be honest about and address. I think it's also true to say that there, as I've been saying in Nigeria, that freedom of religion or belief and persecution on that basis affects everyone. But we have to be honest and straightforward when a particular community is affected more than others, and I'll go on to say a little bit more about that in my speech. So, in the UK, I've mentioned about our Nigerian connections, and a flourishing Nigeria built on the common good is good for us all. But sadly, in Nigeria, this is some way off. Many of us here will have a rough idea of the situation. I look around the chamber and see many colleagues who I know passionately care about freedom of religion or belief all around the world, including in Nigeria. But in the last 6 weeks alone in Nigeria, just 2 examples. 13 people were kidnapped from a church in Kogi State in what the BBC called the second such attack in as many weeks. A bomb was set off in a mosque in Borno State, sadly killing at least 5 worshippers. These are just the latest in a long line of attacks, violence and atrocities, which is why on Christmas Day last year the American government launched strikes on terrorists, the Lakurua militants in the far northwest of Nigeria who are affiliated with Islamic State. Sahel province were the target of that strike. And these strikes, they raise the profile of the uncertainty, fear and insecurity that many Nigerians live with on a daily basis. At least 45,000 Christians have been killed for faith-related reasons between 2011 and 2025 in Nigeria. Happy to.
I
also want to thank the honourable gentleman for his excellent work as FoRB envoy and the extraordinary effort that he's putting into it. Does he agree that in a world in which geopolitics is becoming increasingly transactional, when African governments are increasingly focusing on economic growth rather than civil and political rights, and when intolerance and bigotry is more widespread than ever, it is more vital than it's ever been for British foreign policy to make space for creating a voice for people who don't have them, like Christians in Nigeria. And however hard that is, we should redouble our efforts to do so.
David Smith.
Thank the honourable member for his contribution, and I especially as well for the role that he played in the Truro report, which actually led in the end to the role that I'm playing, and ultimately played a huge role in bringing freedom of religion and belief to the centre of our foreign policy. And certainly that's something that I'm advocating for in my role, and I know that the government takes very, very seriously, and we shouldn't have a false dichotomy, in my opinion, between whether we are advancing freedoms for people or seeking to build economic relationships with them. We should have a holistic relationship with all partner countries that we can around the world. But back to Nigeria, and moderate Muslims are also targeted by these extremists, and we need to call out who these extremists are. Religion is clearly key, though, but to an earlier point, persecution is not necessarily evenly spread in every situation in every country, and that's true in Nigeria. For example, in Kaduna State, after controlling for population, Christians were 15.8 times more likely to be abducted than Muslims, so there is a particular issue there. The situation continues to deteriorate, and I think it's reasonable, therefore, that we ask serious questions of the Nigerian military about the response from a security perspective. On June last year, 258 people were killed in Yelwata in Benue State. The nearest military base was just 20 miles away, but it took 4 hours for anyone to respond. In the face of all this, it's perhaps unsurprising that the United States again announced in late October on social media that it would designate Nigeria a country of particular concern. And as the Middle Belt Times in Nigeria put it, the message is unmistakable. Nigeria's government is capable of fighting terrorism when sufficiently motivated. The capacity exists. The resources are available. What has been missing is political will. Yes, Beat.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for giving way. Given that reliable sources estimate that tens of thousands of Christians have been killed in Nigeria since 2009, largely in the north and the middle belt of Nigeria, placing the country at the epicentre of global persecution of the Christian Church, does he agree that every diplomatic and political lever available to His Majesty's government must now be used to help end this violence and to secure freedom of religion or belief for all?
David Smith.
Again, I thank him for his intervention, and I do agree that, as I was just saying in my previous answer, that it's very, very important for us not to have segmented silos relationships with other countries. We need to treat our relationships holistically, and I'll be looking forward to the Minister's response, because I know that the government is doing a lot, regularly raises cases of freedom of religion or belief with counterparts from foreign governments, but yes, certainly my view is that we need to have a holistic relationship with other countries, and that includes freedom of religion or belief. Let me just quickly move to the issue of legal suppression of freedoms. Freedom House reports that how state and local governments in Nigeria have been known to endorse de facto official religions in their territory, placing limits on other religious activity. Apostasy and blasphemy laws, so-called, have spread into Nigeria's social and legal landscape, often led by regional or local governments. 12 northern states have enacted Sharia penal codes, with Christian Solidarity Worldwide reporting is effectively creating a state religion in violation of Nigeria's constitution. I'd be happy to, yes.
College.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I thank him for bringing attention to the persecution of people of different faiths and beliefs, and particularly the heinous murders of thousands of people. My honourable friend knows about the case of Mubarak Bala, who was jailed for a Facebook post that was deemed to be blasphemous. After he left Islam, he was sent to a psychiatric hospital, forced to leave his home and state, and arrested. He calls on the UK and Western governments to repeal their own blasphemy laws, and explained that when he was arrested, he was told that, quote, even the British have blasphemy laws. Because today we have blasphemy and blasphemous libel in Northern Ireland. It is a criminal offence under common law. Now, it's not used in Northern Ireland. It is a dead letter law. However, other countries that do use their blasphemy laws in very extreme ways often point to these dead letter laws in other countries as justifying their own behaviour. So does my honourable friend agree with me that no country should have blasphemy laws, whether directly or by the back door?
I thank our honourable friend for that intervention, and I've been very pleased to meet Mubarak Bala twice now, the most recent time in person in Warsaw, and it was a great credit to himself, and he suffered very unjustly as a result of being a humanist. And yes, you know, it is, I'm sure we'll hear from the Minister, but the government seems very clear that, you know, blasphemy is not something we should be sworn in terms of blasphemy laws, and you know, we do see people suffering as a result of them. In the interest of time, I'll move on a little bit and maybe not take any interventions just for a moment. Why does this matter to us? We're 3,000 miles away from Nigeria, but we are linked by history, by culture, by language, and we're linked by friendship. You know, Nigeria and the United Kingdom have a very strong relationship. It would be easy to dismiss Nigeria's problem as something over there, persecution of religion or belief abroad. It's not our problem. But that position would be irresponsible, it would be immoral, and it would ultimately be untenable. It's immoral because when we see other humans in need, we want to respond as humans. How could we turn away from the suffering we see in Nigeria when we see families ripped apart, innocent people killed, and power brokers restricting agency, liberty and conscience? We in the UK have a rich history of experiencing and rejecting religious intolerance that we can share in humility, hopefully, with others. We had civil wars, we had riots. Those riots became debates became freedoms, and those freedoms led to flourishing. And the hallmark of freedom is wanting freedom for others. That brings me to irresponsibility. It would be irresponsible to assume that Nigeria's problems are also not our own. Nigeria is playing an increasingly influential role globally. It's young, resource-rich and growing. The UN has projected that Nigeria will become the third most populous country on earth by 2050. And the UK is home, as I've said, to a substantial and growing community of Nigerian-born residents. They're hard-working, law-abiding, enterprising part of our nation, and we're privileged to have them with us. So working well with Nigeria is in the interest for the sake of all. Nigeria also represents a genuine democracy in a region where military governments are common and where civil society is precarious. As climate change disrupts the Sahel and Central Africa further, the promise of a resilient Nigeria is, with a strong sense of its future as a pluralist democracy, can't be understated. I'm happy to, yeah.
Well, Pinkerton.
I'm hugely grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way and for the excellent speech. He's giving a very powerful evocation of the significant crisis that exists within Nigeria in terms of intolerance and faith-related death. But can he also maybe give some indication, and this is a genuine question of inquiry, to what extent are there intersections with other sources of conflict, such as terrorism, resource competition that he just mentioned, and potentially even climate change? To what extent are they drivers of the kind of religious intolerance that we see playing out in his speech?
I thank the honourable friend for that question, and he's right to draw other factors into this equation, whether it be competition over land in the Middle Belt in Nigeria, whether it be climate change that leads to that sometimes, whether it be other forms of identitarian conflict, competition over resources. These things are true without question. It is also true, in my estimation, that there is a specifically religious dimension and a political dimension at times to the persecution that we have. So it can be both at the same time, is what I would say. But one thing that I'm concerned about is that we can lead to a slippery slope. If you compare to a situation like in China, for example, where Tibetan Buddhists have been persecuted for years, and that was later followed by a crackdown on Falun Gong and Christians. And then, where religious prisoners ultimately ended up being joined by journalists, activists, trade unionists, and other rabble-rousers, the state would prefer not to deal with. So we need to robustly defend freedom of religion or belief to avoid that slippery slope. The government is doing some great things that I get to see. I'll just make a little bit of progress, and I want to make sure the Minister has time to respond. The government is making a great deal of progress, and we will hear from the Minister, but it's true to say that in my estimation, the government is supporting security work in Nigeria, working closely with the Nigerian government, the Spring programme that I hope we hear more about, and building that sense of inter-communal, interfaith relationship building, peace building, something that I myself did in the past in a different context. This is really, really important. I'd love to hear more from the Minister about what that could actually look like if we grow that more. I will give way.
I
thank the honourable member for giving way, and I suppose I would just remind the House of Matthew 5 verse 10. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And I think we all must bear that in our minds tonight. And I suppose the question that I would ask is, how many more burned churches, murdered worshippers are we going to have to see before actual concrete action is taken? And I suppose I would just ask the honourable member, he's doing an amazing job in this area, well done in that regard, but we do need more concrete action. UK aid should be conditional on demonstrable action to protect religious freedom. Surely that's a question of the Minister tonight.
David Smith.
I thank the Honourable Lady for a question and intervention, and again I agree that we should have holistic relationships with all of our partners. It should not be a hierarchy of importance when it comes to an economic trade deal versus us pursuing our values as a country when it comes to things like freedoms, and I'm sure we'll hear more from the Minister on that. Just a couple of things as I sort of draw my remarks to a conclusion. I mentioned law and politics and what's happening there. I think this is almost the more worrying issue in a way, because it creates a context in which it becomes acceptable to persecute. And as long as ethno-religious fiefdoms are maintained contrary to the promises of the Nigerian constitution, widespread reconciliation may be out of reach. And I've said, the government, just one more, the government is clear in its opposition to the spread of blasphemy and apostasy laws, and I support that. And in our complex and committed relationship with Nigeria, Britain has a range of tools at our disposal to support change in the direction of FoRB. So I look forward to hearing from the Minister about the excellent work that the government is doing, and I remain committed to it myself. I'll take one last.
Order, it might be helpful to explain that interventions are not allowed from the opposition front bench, so the member in charge won't. David Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for clarifying that, and I apologise to the right honourable member opposite. So just in conclusion, Nigeria is rich with potential possibility. But violent and legal suppression of FoRB is undermining, in my view, the country's future. A plural Nigeria rooted in the common good and with 250 million people where they have genuine freedom to reason, question and believe is a blessing to Nigeria itself, to Africa and to the world. A flourishing Nigeria is also good for Britain and a challenge to the autocrats of West Africa in declaring that freedom is, in the end, worth it. Conversely, every Christian kidnapped, mosque bombed, every atheist imprisoned risks the continuation of the cycle of ethno-religious conflict and a diminishing of all that Nigeria can be. No one wants that, and I'm pleased that the UK government is serious about freedom of religion or belief in Nigeria. I'm also committed to working with the government in every way possible to support a better way forward. This is an issue that needed attention years ago, and I'm glad that it now has that attention.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for North Northumberland for calling this debate and for his tireless work as Special Envoy. And I want to thank the colleagues who have intervened from across the House for their thoughtful contributions, and I'll try in the time to respond to as many points as I can. I'd like to declare an interest in this debate as a Christian myself, who has also worked with Open Doors and others to draw attention to these cases in the past where people are persecuted for their beliefs. And I genuinely welcome the chance to keep this important matter in the spotlight, and it's an issue I've engaged with on many years, including when I was Shadow Africa Minister on the other side. And I've also had the pleasure, and I'm glad to hear the Honourable Member speak about Nigerian communities in the UK. I've had the pleasure of meeting with Nigerian Christian communities in my own constituency in Cardiff South and Penarth, and the amazing contribution that they make, and as well with Nigerian communities across the UK. And he's right that this is an issue that should interest and concern and deeply shock us all. In terms of some of the horrific things that we've seen, because the brutality of the attacks against religious communities in Nigeria is truly appalling, and the cold-blooded massacre of over 200 Christians in Yelawata, Benue State last October was particularly shocking. We've heard indeed many terrible statistics today, but last year's Open Doors watch list, as we've heard, reported that armed groups murdered 3,100 Christians for their faith in Nigeria in 2025 and abducted a further 3,000. And it is shocking to hear that extremists have stormed villages, killed worshippers, kidnapped families and burned homes, and we've heard some truly horrific examples today. Of course, Nigeria's constitution promises freedom of religion or belief for all, and every person in that country deserves the right to practice their faith or belief safely without fear or persecution. And when we defend freedom of religion or belief, we help build trust between communities, strengthen Nigeria's social fabric, and create conditions for lasting peace and prosperity for everyone. And that is why Nigeria is one of the 10 countries prioritised for targeted action in the government strategy on freedom of religion or belief launched last July. And we welcome the President's commitment to religious freedoms and his pledge to safeguard freedom of belief for all Nigerians. And we are working closely, and I'm glad that the Honourable Member recognised this, with the Nigerian authorities, along with communities directly and faith leaders, to uphold and protect these freedoms. Indeed, my colleague, the Minister for Africa in the other place, Baroness Chapman, continues to be engaged closely on this topic, and she is extremely concerned about the violence against many communities, including religious communities in Nigeria. We raise these issues. The Honourable Member wanted to know and reference some of the work we're doing at the highest levels. Indeed, she spoke directly with Nigeria's Foreign Minister, Taga, about freedom of religion or belief in November. Our High Commissioner and team engaged with local authorities, communities and faith leaders in affected areas, and this includes groups such as the Governors Forum, National Peace Committee and National Human Rights Commission. And we know that criminality, intercommunal violence and insecurity make things worse for religious communities, and that's why we focus on tackling the root causes of instability to protect people's rights, and whether that's they come from Christian communities, Muslim communities, indeed humanists, or others with beliefs that are different, or indeed non-beliefs. We need to create a society where everybody is able to live and practice in the way that they wish to, and I'm glad he mentioned the case of Mubarak Bala, which I remember raising on many occasions in the past too. And we highlight, of course, violations of freedom of religion or belief on the international stage and push for joint action, including at the UN, the G7, and as part of the Article 18 Alliance, and of course in bodies like the Human Rights Council. Now, he's rightly pointed to the violent extremist groups, and indeed a number of members referred to, like Boko Haram, Islamic State West Africa, who continue to shockingly attack people in the northeast of Nigeria, and they target anyone who rejects their ideology. And I think he made an important point that it's not just Christians, it's also the northeast, mainly Muslim population, who also suffer terribly as a result. But the Christian minority faces extreme persecution through mass kidnappings and murders that are utterly unacceptable, I think have shocked the world. And of course, intercommunal violence and criminal banditry are linked and fuel deaths and tensions, and criminals smuggle weapons into Nigeria, affecting both Muslims and Christians. They use motorbikes to evade the authorities and all sorts of other techniques. And of course, conflict over land and resources in Nigeria often also take on a religious aspect as tensions rise and violence escalates. And those ideologies can sometimes be used as psychological warfare, with attacks on churches and mosques seen as acts of revenge. But peaceful dialogue can resolve disputes before they escalate. And since our last debate on this in 2024, we've rolled out the UK's Strengthening Peace and Resilience in Nigeria programme across Kaduna, Katsina, Benue and Plateau states. And I was glad to see that referenced. It's doing very, very important work, reducing violence by strengthening local peace and justice systems and supporting practical community-led solutions. And one early success, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that 5,000 internally displaced people have returned and resettled after a peace agreement between the Bassa and Igbura communities in Nasawara State. If we don't tackle the root causes of insecurity, religious communities will remain at risk of these terrible atrocities. And that's why, and he mentioned our cooperation with Nigeria more broadly on security issues, which I'm very pleased to play a role in alongside my colleague, the Minister for Africa. But last July, we hosted the third Security and Defence Partnership Dialogue with Nigeria. I will be generous and give him a little in his new position.
I would.
I thank the Minister for giving way. The tragic case of Deborah Samuel Yakubu was a reminder of the culture of impunity that's been allowed to develop in too many parts of Nigeria. So will the Minister assure the House that the UK government does everything and takes every opportunity to stress the need for improved security in those vulnerable, particularly vulnerable parts of Nigeria, to make sure that people are safe to exercise their religious belief?
Minister.
I absolutely can, and I mentioned a range of the different levels in which we do that, and indeed my colleague, the Minister for Africa, raised at the highest level a number of these issues, but we continue to engage, and the High Commissioner and the team do an excellent job there in engaging at all levels to raise these cases. That's why we have this dialogue, we have the Spring Programme, we have the investment that we're making across a range of areas with the Nigerian authorities, who are close partners in many respects and many issues, not just in Nigeria, but more broadly. And we agreed to strengthen our cooperation and provide practical support to defend against these threats. And that actually includes very practical steps, such as sharing operational lessons to counter new tactics being used by terrorists, including the use of drones and improvised explosive devices, which have tragically, of course, been used against civilians in too many locations. And the UK is also, of course, trying to address wider issues around poverty and humanitarian concerns, and we support hundreds of thousands of people through our humanitarian and resilience programme. But I want to assure you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the Envoy, that we will keep working with Nigerian authorities and faith leaders to address the shocking violence against people who are simply trying to follow their faith or belief, and particularly welcome the concerns that have been raised about Christian communities, but it's of course affecting many, and we will work at every level to ensure that this violence is brought to an end, and we'll also work globally for these issues, and really want to praise the Special Envoy for the work he does on these important issues.